Okay, we are recording. It is 1 p.m. on July 21st, 2027. I'm sorry, 2025. And I am Janet Hurley, the Land Use Review Board Chair, and I will ask board members to introduce themselves as I see them on screen. Alex?
Alex Weinhagen, board member. Hello.
Kirsten?
Kirsten Sultan, board member, present.
Sarah?
Sarah Had, board member, present.
And Brooke?
Brooke Dingledine, board member, present.
Thank you. I do have one agenda update. We are going to have a personnel issue to discuss in executive session, so I am adding that. Are there any other agenda updates? Okay. Hearing and seeing none. Do we have any public comments on non-agenda items? Thomas, that would be you at this point.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right then. Operations, budget, and legislative updates. Is Pete here yet? He's not here yet. I'll start then. So the district coordinator job posting is out. Sarah, thank you for spreading that on LinkedIn. I noticed. And then, as people may recall, Rachel and Sarah and I are going to start meeting to draft a budget that would then come to the board for September approval and discussion before approval. Also, we want to start thinking about legislative fixes and sort of revisiting the list that was put together last year. And so, board members, I would encourage you to send any proposed legislative fixes or changes to the Act 181 information in particular to Pete so that he can get those worked up into an Excel format for us. And we can discuss those before the legislative session, the next legislative session. Pete, do you have anything? I just noted that the district coordinator job description is out.
Great. I was gonna flag that too.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Any folks that you have in mind, send them that way. Be great. A good applicant pool.
Okay, and Rachel isn't here for any updates. And if that's all you have, Pete, we can keep moving along here.
March along. Yeah, thanks.
All right. So studies and reports. I'll just mention that I did meet with Representative Sheldon last week to initiate a conversation about the Tier 3 report deadline and the Tier 3 report content. And I'm looking to schedule meetings with Senator Watson and also the House and Senate Agriculture committees in the coming weeks. So, and I think I mentioned that on Thursday that I did meet with Representative Sheldon, but what else for me? We're going to be discussing the regional plan application guidelines. So I don't think I have much more to discuss on what I'm working on. So let's turn it over to Sarah next.
I don't have any further updates right now on Tier 1A. However, Kirsten and I did meet and discussed the 1 in 10 acre towns. Kirsten, did you want to chime in on that?
No, I think we're making progress and still envision returning to the board with a recommendation in the foreseeable near future. Maybe we could also mention, Sarah, that we've initiated talking about our respective work on tier 2. The elements that you and I have both taken on.
Yes, and I think you were going to follow up with Pete on getting a copy of the 1 in 10 acre form in Word format. And hopefully Pete will pull you in on that conversation as well.
Yeah, Pete, you'll be hearing from me.
Hey,
Okay.
great. Yes, happy to send you that too.
And so Sarah, that's all you have today for updates?
Yes, I think what I'm going to be doing is hopefully next week we can get tier 1A back to the board, or scheduled at least.
Okay. Kirsten,
Nothing new to report.
okay, great.
Sort of a continuation of what's been mentioned recently.
Brooke,
We're preparing for our appeals stakeholder meeting number 6 tomorrow, which will be a full board meeting starting at 1 o'clock, I believe. Just getting prepared for it. It will be a discussion on a possible board model and the components and structure if we were to take on a municipal appeals. So we're going to try to focus on that and trying not to get too involved in the debate again between court and board, because what we're trying to do is create a choice, the best options available that we can think of for then the board to consider, analyze, and determine capacity, timing, etc., and whether or not ultimately it's a better decision to stay with the court or to use the board as an appellate body. So we're hoping for a good turnout, and I'm looking forward to it. We have 2 hours scheduled.
hey, thank you. Alex, anything on 8C?
No additional update. More to come
Okay,
later.
okay, so I think we can keep moving then. Item F, discussion and possible action on draft regional planning commission application guidelines. Now, we shared a version out, but we have incorporated a lot of comments since then. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Rebecca, but I'm wondering if you want to share the current working document on screen.
Yep, I can do that. Just
Okay,
wait
great.
one moment.
Sure.
Janet,
And
are
then
you
what-
sharing a document we've seen before, or is this?
No, this is the working document that that has incorporated comments and revisions in response to comments. And I think we're still hoping to work on it just a little bit more this afternoon after this meeting ends. And then we'll be sending it out for posting on Thursday's meeting, or for Thursday's meeting. But while Rebecca's getting that up, can I ask board members for any comments on the guidelines? The draft guidelines, I should say. Sarah.
I'll just say that as I've been working with you and Rebecca closely, you have all of them. And I think that where we're at right now is refining it based upon the feedback received. And I think hopefully the intent is this afternoon to do a final sort of go through in terms of formatting and wording and cleaning up. So it's in good shape. I feel very confident for Thursday. We'll have something for the whole board to act on.
Thanks. I'll just point out that one thing that we are still working on, and I'm waiting to hear from ACCD ADS on, is how we maybe taking in future land use map information. And the ACCD folks, are specifically the DHCD folks, the Department of Housing and Community Development, they'll be setting up a kind of map viewer for their internal review of the village center, downtown center, village area, and planned growth area boundaries. And I think that if we can piggyback on that, that's how we should do this. I don't think that a PDF submission will give us the facility to do the kinds of comparisons that we'll need to be doing in order to analyze those boundaries to be sure that they meet statutory standards. So that piece of this document is still in development. Currently, we're just suggesting that a PDF is sufficient, but I think that it probably won't be, and I don't know if others have thoughts on that point that they would like to share, but I invite you to do so. Kirsten.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any specific recommendation for what those exact mapping standards need be, other than we all know one needs to be able to zoom in to ascertain the level of precision needed to interpret the maps. So whatever format, will support that functionality, I defer to the people who are involved in defining and hosting that mapping information to help us establish those elements.
Yeah, and initially the guidelines contemplated having what we were calling a scalable PDF that you could zoom in and zoom out and not lose resolution. But what we really need to be doing though is looking at different data layers relative to the proposed boundaries of those future land use areas, and including things like zoning and flood hazard, and we would not be able to do that outside of a GIS or a map viewer environment.
Well, yeah, sometimes when you turn on too many layers and have too much information sandwiched on top of it, you lose the ability to understand the content.
Exactly. So, Alex, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. You having some GIS experience, as well as working on the Tier 3 mapping.
No, I think you adequately described the issue. That originally we were thinking, just PDFs of a high resolution, but and getting the GIS data to back them up after the adoption of the plan and the FLUs and the Tier 1B areas and all of that. But I agree, it makes sense to get that GIS information to help facilitate the review.
Yeah. Okay. So, Rebecca, do you have any sort of summary or overview comments on changes that we've made or on the guidelines in general?
Well, some of these changes I still need to talk with you and Sarah about.
Yeah.
But so
Yeah.
what I did since the last time that the board discussed these is I had made notes in the rules and then had gone back through to clarify those spots that people had asked for either more information or to stay closer to what the statute actually said. So I did go through that. One of the other notes that I had, not from the board meeting, but I think from one of the work group meetings, or one of the comments that we got, was to put a definition in for what consistent with means, as there is a definition in the statute, so it just kind of points us in that direction for what the board's going to be applying, and if we want that one, that is something that is new altogether. Do we to wait a
It's
second, Janet? Let's see if you're looking it up.
4302F. I kind of want
Yeah.
to see what it says. Let's see.
Sure.
4342F. Standard of review. Yeah, so with regard to the future land use map, I think what we were worried about was that the boundaries for the centers and the growth area and village areas, the question was whether they had to be coincident with the proposed tier 1B or tier 1A areas. Or could somebody suggest a subset of one of those future land use areas to be tier 1B or A? And Sarah and I felt that that would just open up a can of worms. And so if a future land use map proposes a boundary for a center or for a village area or a planned growth area, any of those categories can be either all in or not. But that we don't want to start seeing subsets of those different future land use map areas being proposed to be tier 1. So the issue is, because the Title 10 instructs the board to make sure that those boundaries are consistent with, that the tier 1B and 1A boundaries are consistent with the future land use map areas that are proposed. And I think we want to define that consistent with means they correspond to them. They correspond to the
Oh.
boundaries of those future land use areas. Does that make sense? Sarah?
I think the term we were referring to is coincident with.
Right. That consistent with meant coincident with in terms of tier 1B and tier 1A boundaries.
Okay. I had thought that it referred to and I apologize because this is one that is, I think it was in response to, but I was thinking that in, so 24, 43, 48, H, 4, they just use the term consistency 3 times, like when you're looking at the different, so I thought it was giving a definition to that. I thought that was the note, was like whether we should then point, because then you, like, if you look at, so
4.
4.
Right.
A,
The
and then
affirmative
it cites
determination
to-
shall be based on consistency with, yeah, and then and that is defined in the 4302F. But
Yeah, but I'll add the 1.
the
as well.
question that, yeah, the question that we raised in response to DHCD comments was this question of whether proposed tier 1B and tier 1A areas could not coincide with the future land use map boundaries.
Yeah. So this is what we did. We didn't actually use that same term. This is
Oh, okay. So
right.
I see.
So just to kind of orient the group to this, now we're looking at, so in the scheme, right? So we have, our 3 types of reviews, right? There's the pre-application stage, there's the application stage, and potentially a redetermination stage. And in each set of the regulations, there's a part that kind of sets out what we're going to be reviewing for. And so this is where we added that in to make clear that if a municipality was proposing a tier 1B area, and then we list the different types, so the downtown centers, village centers, planned growth areas, or village areas are the future land use areas that are eligible for tier 1B status. If tier 1B, do we need status again? Status.
I think so. Yes.
Is sought for one of these areas, it must include the full extent of the area, not a sub area. So that way we just really make clear that we're not carving out little areas that would then make it really, I think, impossible for a person to know who they need to go to for a permit. So
Yeah. And I wonder if you want an FLU in front of the area
yes, I
and
can do
not a
that.
sub
Yep.
area. Alex.
Right, so yeah, this is my question, not Thomas's, but in the future, call on me when the hand is raised, and then I'll defer to Thomas when it is his question.
Yeah, got it.
In any case, so let me just be clear. So the way this is worded, if a regional plan shows a village center area and the municipality would like a tier 1B that is some subset of that, they don't want it to include the entire FLU, a portion thereof that's fully within it, we would not allow that.
Correct. You know, potentially a municipality of that ilk could, if they just wanted, what they could do is call part of it a center and then call what's around it that they don't want to be tier 1B a village area. And then they're just going for the tier 1B for the center.
So we want this to be policy just to keep our lives a little more sane and have less complexity, because it seems like if a municipality was interested in a smaller subset of a village center FLU for a tier 1B designation, that application would be consistent with, you know, the requirements. If they wanted to leave some areas within that FLU out of the tier 1B, that's we don't care about that, right? Because tier 1B is a voluntary opt-in kind of a thing. So I guess what I'm
So
saying
in
is,
that case, I
why?
guess then the regional planning commissions would have to submit a separate map that was showing that the tier 1B areas that are being requested, you know, they'll need to show different data for the tier 1B. But Sarah, go ahead.
I was going to pose the question, Alex, why would a municipality want to carve out part of a flu area for a tier 1B and not go with the whole thing?
So I'm thinking of the municipality that I came from before coming to the Act 250 program, and I was paying attention a little while ago when they were talking about whether to endorse a tier 1B. This is Heinsberg, and there were certain landowners who felt that portions of the area that was going to be mapped as village center should not benefit from the tier 1B status. And so there was discussion about, do we have the flexibility to be more specific as long as it's fully within the FLU? Can we exclude certain areas that people might be looking for more Act 250 review on? So I don't know how that turned out. I didn't pay enough attention to see how that discussion went, but I know it happened. And because it's an opt-in system, it just seems like it's possible. It's a possibility that a municipality might say, you know, great, the regional planning commission mapped this as our village center, but we only want tier 1B for this 75% of it. We would like to leave out this particular portion of our village center for tier 1B. So that's just a possibility. And I'm just trying to understand why we would foreclose that if it's an opt-in situation to begin with.
Alex, can I ask, why would they map it as center if they didn't want, like, what's different about it that they wouldn't want the tier 1B status, do you think? What would be the reasoning?
Yeah, I'd have to look back at the discussions to see the specifics in Heinsberg, but I think honestly, in this case, there were certain residents that did not want Act 250 jurisdiction to be diminished in any way, in any part of the village center. So they were just opposed to tier 1B status, period. And
So it
as
was
part of the
maybe a
discussion, I think the
compromise.
select board said, we think it makes sense. And then the discussion then turned into, are there particular areas that are ripe for more development where continued full Act 250 oversight, would be beneficial to the community. And that's where the conversation went. Again, I don't know how it turned out. I'm just highlighting the fact that what the regional planning maps as an FLU doesn't have to be the same as what a municipality feels is appropriate for a tier 1B or a tier 1A for that matter. But I know we're talking about tier 1B at the moment.
I think both eventually, but yeah. Sarah?
So I think to answer or to sort of chip in here, I think the intent is that rather than having these conversations at our board level about what areas to include and not include, that really this should be part of that robust local conversation. And that the correct way of including or excluding areas within the future land use maps is perhaps the best conversation to be had in terms of what areas should be eligible for the benefits with tier 1A and tier 1B, as opposed to punting and deferring it to the board level. So I think there's still an opportunity for boards to make carve outs, but really trying to orient people to have those conversations at the local municipal level with the community rather than punting it to the board.
So Janet, is this something that you've gotten some feedback on from the regional planning commissions as to their understanding of how their member municipalities are looking at saying yes or no to tier 1B? And does everyone at that level understand this potential constraint that it cannot be a specified area, that it must be consistent with the FLU?
Not yet. We were alerted to this from DHCD comments. And so that's where it hasn't been vetted yet with the regional planning commissions.
So Janet, this actually came in as a result of one of the RPC, I think it was some BAPTA comments that were received that advocated that it should be consistent with.
I think it was DHCD comments in response to discussions that they were having with VAPTA and finding out that there were RPCs that were going to be making tier 1B requests for areas that didn't coincide with the future land use map boundaries. But we can double check that, Sarah. Brooke?
Yeah, I don't want to change the subject if people have more conversation on this. I had more of a conceptual question.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, Kirsten.
Well, maybe I'll jump. Yeah, I just have a quick question. If you recall, what's the gist of the DHCD comments that led to this qualifier?
So I'll get back to you, Kirsten, in a minute when I call them up.
Okay.
And let's let Brooke ask her conceptual question.
Yeah, it has to do with the actual hearing. I was trying to think about the logistics of how it's going to be. And what I'm getting from the proposed guidelines is it's more of just, it seems to me it's more of just like a public meeting for people. I mean, it's a hearing, being called a hearing, but it's for people to come and express their concerns or objections. And so I'm trying to figure out if there are objections made, they have to be responded to in the written decision that we make. Is there any rulings that need to take place at the hearings? Or, I mean, I'm trying to figure out what people would come and present. And I suppose it's capable that somebody could come in with an expert and say, your mapping's wrong, or, I don't know. So I'm just trying to figure out how we get prepared to, I don't think that we need to rule on evidence or anything, but to be able to be well prepared, to be able to cross-examine information, to gather, it says we can ask questions of the folks, but I'm just a little bit concerned. I want to make sure that we're prepared to be able to respond if we have any need to respond in that venue at all. I'm not sure that we do.
Right. So there are two different types of meetings, as you said. One is a public meeting, and we are contemplating holding a public meeting with potentially site visit in the region for the pre-application phase. And in those meetings, it's just like, the meetings that we hold now. We offer for anyone attending to let us know what's on their mind. We aren't necessarily obligated to take that and do findings or anything like that, particularly in that pre-application phase. In the final, in the determination of compliance phase, we do need to hold a hearing. And the people that have standing must be objectors. They must meet the statutory definition of objector. And they must use the form that the board is developing for the objector, for their objections, to express their objections. And we must, as a board, in our written findings, determine whether or not those objections should be upheld. And if upheld, what recommendations we might have for the RPC to correct or revise the plan to address. And as those public hearings are public meetings, we would also entertain what is on anyone's mind, but we only are obligated to address objectors in our written decisions. The objectors are limited in terms of the scope of their objections to only whether the plan, as adopted by the Regional Planning Commission, whether that plan includes all of the statutory elements that are required for the regional plan, and presumably whether those statutory elements meet statutory standards. So their objections are limited to just that, and they must meet the standards for being an objector, and those include having participated in the public hearing process at the regional level. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that really is very helpful. Thank you. I was trying to, get up to speed and understand the whole sequence. I do have just one mention in I think it's page 12 of the last version that I saw, where it talks about the hearing record.
Yeah,
And it says the hearing, record of the hearing will include, and C is any recording of the public hearing. I think it either needs to be that there's a recording or there isn't. I'm not sure that that's like, up to anybody to, I mean, there should be a recording of it, right? So I
yeah,
think that we should require it.
yeah. And that kind of makes it sound like, if somebody recorded it and nobody knew they were recording it, we'd have to hunt that recording down and find it. And so,
And figure
So,
out if it's correct or, yeah,
maybe it should say the board's recording of the public hearing. Rebecca,
Got it.
great.
recording
I'll take
or
out the
record,
yes.
it could be recordings because they might stop
I mean,
and
that's,
start.
I think that's why Annie was there initially. Like, let's say there was more than one hearing day, right? So
Mhm.
then you would have recordings. You wouldn't just
Yeah,
have one. So I mean, I think it speaks for itself that it would be our recording, but I don't think there's any harm in being more specific. And so yeah, I guess the question is just I could do like a /s, so that way it could be the board's recording or recordings of the public
Like-
or
Parentheses around the S.
yeah. Do you think that would be? I could do that. I could do the board's recording of the public. I could do hearings too, if that's better. Like this S here or an S. What do people prefer?
I think recordings and hearing, we're only holding one hearing, so,
Unless we extend it, right? Like there could
but
be
that's still, that's still the same hearing though. If you
Okay.
continue a hearing, it's still the same hearing. You don't have to rewarn it.
Okay.
So,
How's this then?
yeah, yeah. Is that Alex or Thomas?
That's Alex.
Okay,
I just wanted
Alex.
to get back to Kirsten's question. Were you able to dig up the rationale from DHCD as to that original question?
So there is a comment from Jay Kemrick. Will the LURB allow 1B areas to have different boundaries than the qualifying land uses? Downtown or village centers, planned growth areas, village areas, minus any statutory exclusions. So I think the conversation around it must have been in somewhere other than their comment that they put on the Word document. Do you recall, Sarah?
Yes, it was in the comments that I received from VAPTA on Tier 1A.
Okay. So what were those comments?
Those comments are, it should be clear that is for, all right, there's a, let me. It should be clear that is for those lands and certain RPC FLUAs only. The law says the boundaries of the requested area are consistent with our areas. That could create wiggle room and the chance for conflict. It should be the same, not additional lands or less lands. The time for figuring this out is in drafting our plan. The new 4348A small c has the designation process, our map, and the tier process should use the same map. If there's a minor change needed to our map, the minor amendment process can be used. I think I captured the relevant portion of it.
So that was
So-
VAPTA comments, so that infers that the RPCs are in agreement about it? Is that your interpretation of that?
So it was a consolidated VAPTA list. I think that there was some editing done to try and make it as unified as possible, but I'm not sure that there was 100% agreement in that.
Alex, were you about to
So-
say something?
Yeah, so two things. One, I want to make sure that, I don't want to beat this dead horse, but I want to make sure people understand. I'm not suggesting that we should have flexibility for tier 1B designation areas that would be outside of a future land use area in a way that would make those tier 1B areas inappropriate. I'm suggesting that some municipalities, and maybe they're the exception to the rule, not anywhere near the majority, might want to say within this appropriate FLU, we would like a sub portion of that to be our tier 1B area. Just as I envision the tier 1A areas are also going to be sub FLU areas. And so that's all I was getting at. But if everyone's comfortable and the RPCs are comfortable, then we can make it required that they be the same. And that just means that when a municipality wants to have greater flexibility within an FLU, they're going to have to go to the regional planning commission and ask them to shrink the FLU to match with their vision for the tier 1B or the tier 1A area. And that's just more process, but we can do that. I am cognizant of the fact that the RPCs are doing a lot of work with the municipalities right now on the FLU mapping, and I'm sure it's all wonderful, but I'm guessing there might be times when a municipality at a later date says, yeah, we thought the FLU made sense, but we always had this vision for our tier 1B or 1A area being a subset within a plans, within a village center or what have you. That's all. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to go with what everyone else feels is appropriate.
Brooke?
Yeah, I'm on the standardized side of this debate, I think. I don't see, to then create like a subcategory. I think it kind of defeats sort of the purpose of it, doesn't it? It's just my reaction to that. The other thing is, I don't know that all the planning of between regional and towns is wonderful. We have heard some concerns expressed about the lack of input by townspeople. So I just want to clarify that comment. I am concerned still about that. I'm just not sure that the LURB has any control or ability to affect what's going on between the regional planning commissions and the towns people or the towns.
So I can reach out to Charlie Baker and Catherine Dimitrick and just sort of have a discussion about this to get more clarity about where the RPCs are on this question. Does that sound good? I see nods. Okay.
Sounds good to me, Janet. Thank you.
I'll do that. I don't think, Rebecca, do you think there are any other substantive revisions that we should discuss?
The only, I was trying to think, I don't think so. Not today. So, but I was trying to, there was one more that I had thought of that we talked about, and I wanted to make sure everyone, I think, one of the comments, and I apologize, I forget whose it was from Thursday's meeting. That was another change that we had made, in the, for the objectors in the pre-application phase. So it has been made clear that not only do they have to have 20 in number, but that the 20 that sign one have to own and or reside in there, but also to have to establish that they have participated in the adoption process of the regional plan if they want to be one of the 20 for the objector status for our review process. So that's been clarified. So that was a substantive change made since.
And
Where is that clarified, Rebecca? I'm looking at just the document on the screen, so I don't know what change was made
So
to.
that would
address that issue.
be. Dun, dun, dun. 1 second.
Yeah, you were right. Notice or right there, yeah, and
Notice of it-
interested
yeah.
party objections, yeah.
And then right here in purple, Alex.
What page are you on, Rebecca?
Well, it's
It'd be
it's
page. Oh, let's see if it's gonna.
pagination has changed.
It is.
So
Yeah.
So this looks like I'm on page 12. So that the bottom of 11 going on to
But-
page 12.
Yeah, I know it's
It's,
different. I'm just trying to find my version where I have highlights and stuff.
So if it helps at all, we're in section 9, subsection C. And then in subsection 2B.
So Rebecca, this seems to address the concern. I was one person who raised the concern about needing to be clear about objectors having participated in the regional plan adoption process. This seems to address it in regards to a petition of at least 20 people, if not a party pursuant to 4348D. Does that mean that that applies to a singular person who is not at least 20 persons? Because that could be an objector as well, I would assume, or not?
No.
So-
So the oh, do you want to go ahead, Janet? If you
no, go ahead, Rebecca, you go.
Yes, so the statute tells you who can qualify to be an objector. So if you go to 24 VSA 4348 subsection little I, and then subsection 2. And well, you have to do both. So 1 and 2, but then in subsection 2, that's what gives you the like who can be the interested party. And so the first one is the one that is the section that we're talking about with the purple in it, with the petition signed by 20 people. And then the second one, my sister, this makes you hop. And so the second way you could be an interested party is if you're listed in subsection D of this same section, which is the state partners that are listed. I don't want to jump from this page so I don't confuse people, but they are listed in for the first time in the pre-application, who we send notice of the filing to. And so
Yes,
that would be,
I
So
get it.
as I,
And that's helpful. So a singular person cannot be an objector. That's helpful. However, a singular group, like a business, a low-income advocacy, or other community or interest groups and organizations that have required notice in writing prior to the date of hearing, that's what's in D, and they can be an objector. Is that?
yes,
Am I reading that right?
yeah,
I don't
they
don't
would have
kn-
had to have requested from the RPC prior to the RPC public hearings on their plan. They don't request us, they request notice from the RPC and thereby can
Correct.
become an objector. But I just want to point out, I think this needs a rewording, Rebecca, because only the 20 people don't have to have been shown to have participated. Only the one person that is the spokesperson need to have participated.
Well, and also, Rebecca, what I was getting
Which-
at was that I think
okay.
the interested parties under 4348D also have to have participated in the regional plan adoption process.
I don't see that. Let me read back through. Well, it does say, yeah, so
Yep.
for subsection 1, any interested party who has participated in the regional plan adoption process may object to the approval. So,
Yeah, so
Here's
all
the-
I'm saying is that in order to be an objector, you have to have participated, regardless of whether you're 20 persons or whether you're one of the statutory, parties in 43, 48.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, but
And I just want that, I want that incorporated somewhere in our guidelines so that,
It's-
a advocacy group doesn't come in and say, well, we didn't participate, but we want,
So-
we're allowed to be an objector.
Alex, we have to provide an objector form, and
Mhm.
that form will ask how the objector qualifies. So it will say, how did you participate?
Okay.
Does that make sense? But you want it in the guidelines.
Well, that was my hope, but I don't want to
Okay.
slow this down or make it overly
No,
cumbersome. So if you
we
feel like
can-
the guidelines is the more appropriate place, then that's fine.
I mean, it could be in both, but we want it on the objector form. We want them to
Yeah.
show on the form where they meet the qualifications for being an objector.
We just check one thing,
Yeah,
Alex.
Ideally,
Um,
I would just put it under C, Rebecca. If I got to write this, I would just, oops, you jumped. Never mind. Sorry.
I did. Well, I want to show you, I want to respond to what you're saying, because I think we were pretty cognizant of this balance between if the statute defines a term, do we really want to restate it in the text, right? And so what we're focusing on right now is this subsection I that defines what interested parties are. So I
Yes.
think the question is like, so you look, so first, so now if we go to the definition sections, we have interested party means as defined in 24, 43, 48, I2. Right. And so we could make this a little bit broader and just say I1 and 2, because that'll get the point. I'm actually going to do that because I think that's a little more.
Yeah.
And so we've already pointed here, right? So now that because we're saying this is how we're defining interested parties, all the statutory requirements already apply, right? And so long as the form makes sure that we can check the box, we don't actually need to restate it in the regulations. That's why we don't go into the different criteria that's in the statute. So we can do that. It was just because the statute already explains it, we just point to it. And that way, when we do the forms, we're going to make sure that the forms cover that content.
Agreed. The change you just made to the definition of interested party addresses my concern.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
That was very helpful, Alex. Like understanding that part.
Yeah.
But let me throw this little monkey wrench in because.
All right.
Interested party is, defined in 2. And it says any 20 people. Okay. And then one of the people had to have participated below. But in number 1, an interested party who has participated in the regional plan adoption process. Well, that's not one person. Interested party is defined as a group of people, at least one of whom had to have participated. It's a defective definition, in my opinion, because it's circular. It's saying, okay, there's one person that participated, but that person's not an interested party, not defined as an interested party to participate singularly. I think we know sort of what they were getting at, but I don't think that the statute correctly specifies, because, in the other normal petition standing stuff, we understand that better. It doesn't, interested persons are people who could be affected by a neighboring, within the immediate neighborhood, that kind of thing. And they have to participate in order to appeal. Here, we're saying it's an interested party individual, I guess, and then that person, if they get 19 other people to come with them, they can make objections as an objector. So I think there is a difference. I think it's not clearly spelled out in the statute.
So, as I'm looking at this, I see that 4348I uses the term party as singular instead of parties as we have it there, Rebecca. I don't know if you want to change that, but my
It's like a, yep,
interpret
thank you.
but my interpretation of party is that it could mean more than one person.
Yep.
So
Can I ask
maybe I'm
Brooke a
not
question?
understanding. Yeah, go ahead, Kirsten.
Brooke, I've been looking at the statute too, as we've been talking about this. Would you think that it's not circular if paragraph 1 was worded an interested party which has participated in the regional plan? So that then when one applies the paragraph 2 definition of interested party, it's less focused on an individual.
So Kirsten,
Like,
the interested party may object, and then that's the definition of an objector. An objector is somebody who meets the definition of interested party who participated.
So in turn, but.
right, but it's a question of individual versus do you have to have 20?
I guess this is the piece that's missing for me. Rebecca, do we like revert back to the original definition of interested party? Like to begin with, we don't have an interested party definition, at least in this section. So this could be somebody who lives in Timbuktu. There's no specification, is there? Or is it? Is there?
So Brooke, I might not be following completely, so just help me through it. But so I'm looking at subsection I, right? And that's where we have, in subsection 1, it says an interested party who has participated. And then we have subsection 2 that says, as used in this section, an interested party means any one of the following. And then it limits the scope of who can be an interested party. So to answer, Kirsten, what you had said about could it be one person, I don't read it that way because it says any 20 persons by a signed petition, right? And then who owns those 20 people after either own property or reside in the region. And then they have to designate a representative, who this was the part that we just ironed out, who can show that they had participated in the planning process. So, and this is just for the objector status. I think one of the one of the things I really like about these regulations is it does build in so that if you did have an individual who was upset with their regional plan and they wanted to come to the public hearing and they wanted to comment on that, we do, like, it's built in to these the process that we've created here, so that they would be able to tell you, like, this is why we're upset, this is why we don't think it meets the requirements. The biggest difference is the statute requires anybody that's considered an objector, we have to make sure those comments that we respond to them in the decision. But where when it's the public, just someone that doesn't meet these 2 requirements, either an entity that's described in subsection D or that meet the 20-person signed petition that own property, we don't have to specifically mention those in the decision. I mean, you could, but we're like we're required by statute. So like that's what we have to make sure we do. And if we can do any more, and that's what the board wants to do, we can try. So I just want to make sure that it's, even though the objector status is so specific, we have built into this a way to make sure the public can participate and be heard and considered.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, like, can somebody from a different town come and be an interested person?
It doesn't look so because it says, well, I guess so if interested party means any 20 persons by signed petition who own property or reside within the region, and then the petition must designate one person to serve as the representative of the petitioners. I had read that it would be one of the 20 would be appointed, but I suppose they could pick somebody that was from a different town, so long as they meet the next requirement is that they participated in the regional plan adoption process.
And
Right.
we're talking about living within a region here, not a town. I mean, for an example,
yeah,
Brooke,
okay. Yeah.
I reside in one region, but I own property in another.
Okay.
So I could be an interested party in both of those regions.
All right, so let me ask the question this way. 24 VSA section 4465, appeals of decisions of the administrative officer. And this is the only place that I know where interested person is defined besides what we're looking at. And in that definition, it talks about a person owning title to property in the municipality, blah, blah, blah. And I know we're talking about region, but I'm trying to find that initial definition if we're expressing it or need to express it to begin with. Who gets to show up at the very first hearing? Do we have, because interested person or a person, you know, that should be defined first.
So we're not
to
using the term
partic-
interested person.
I know, but you see, chapter 117, which, you know, it does define, you know, interested person. I'm trying to figure out, is that in any way valid to identify who these people are to begin with? Then we have that person plus 19 other people.
No, I mean, we are not using the term interested person. It's not relevant here. We are using the term interested party. That is the relevant term.
And Brooke, that term is defined in 4348I2.
Okay. Yep. Just trying to get
Does that
some
help?
clar- Yeah, I was just trying to get clarity on it because, you know, this definition applies to the whole chapter of zoning. I was just trying to understand the clarity of it. So thank
Okay.
you.
The interested person definition.
Okay, let's see where we are. I think we have 10 minutes left maybe on this. Let me look at the, we do, but we could turn it over to Alex if nobody has further comments on the guidelines at this point. We will be discussing these on Thursday. Kirsten.
I just have a very kind of high level general question, and I don't want to put anyone on the spot, and I'm happy to have an offline conversation with Rebecca, but I'm interested to know, is there any element of this regional plan guideline that is contingent on the legislature changing the statute?
No.
Or is it fully complies with the statute as currently enacted?
Yeah, it complies with current statute.
Okay, I just
Yes.
double checking that there's nothing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, you know, there is, as Sarah pointed out, that wiggle room in terms of the tier 1A question. And I'll follow up on that, but no, this is
Just double checking.
this is an
Okay.
interpretation of the current statute.
Yeah, thank you for
and,
confirming.
I think Annette is has her hand up next.
I'll take Alex next.
Well, it could be Thomas. We don't know.
It is Thomas, so go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead then. So I have to say, I find that your discussion to be very disturbing, not for what you guys are doing, but for what the legislature has done. I'm listening to what you're saying and I'm realizing, boy, the legislature really hates the public. I mean, I've testified to this. Nobody attends these regional planning commission meetings. These future land use map processes are going very badly at a lot of the regional planning commissions. The towns are not happy with it. And the idea that 20 people have to get together to file an objection, and the objection can only be limited to whether or not it meets the statutory requirements. I mean, I think that the thing you guys can be pretty assured of is that this is all kind of moot because nobody's going to do it. It's just not a realistic process for Vermonters to consider having to jump through all these hoops. And I'm very, very worried about what's happening at the Regional Planning Commission level as they are coming into our towns and telling them, you have to do this and you have to do that. I'm hearing it from so many different areas. And so I'm just I know that you don't have any control over that, but if you want to talk to the folks at VAPTA, this is the feedback that I'm getting from people, and I can't say it's from every region, but it's from more than one region. And that's not how I thought this was going to be going. But it's like it's forcing towns. You have to do this. You have to do that. And oh well. I wish us all luck. So thank you.
Thanks. Thomas?
Thank you, Thomas Weiss, Montpelier. I have two comments. The first is that in the submissions, I suggest that every document be dated and the dates be updated. I noticed that on the document that's on the screen, it is still showing at the bottom of the pages a date in June 26th on the first page and July 2nd on all of the subsequent pages. And this looks nothing like the document because of the additions and amendments that I downloaded a couple days ago from the site. So please be careful on keeping the dates up to date on the submissions and on your own internal documents.
Thank you,
So
Thomas. I think that it probably was the first page had a different footer, and I may have forgotten to change the date on that page. And then we haven't changed the date on this yet because we are we're tracking our changes, and before we accept those changes, we will put a new date on the bottom of the page. And I'll get the first page this time too.
But if I'm commenting to you on a document that's dated July 2nd and things have been added in this draft version, then we're having a hard time communicating because I can't necessarily point out the same section number or the same page number.
The section numbers haven't changed, only the page numbers, because we're tracking changes. So until we accept the changes, it's and the changes are tracked. It's the same document with some proposed revisions, basically. And it does change the pagination, yes. So it does make it hard to follow. One of the other things that we're going to be doing, I think, and Rebecca, I think you can confirm that we're finding that this subsection labeling is very hard to follow. And we're going to change it to a number 0.000, 001, 002, I think. Is that right, Rebecca?
Yes,
Because
yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
This 1A, B2, it's too ridiculously convoluted to follow. So we are hoping to fix that as well.
I did find that. My other comment is the online form for submitting objections. I hope that you have arranged that when someone submits objections using that online form, that the system returns some kind of a record copy with the comments and the date it was submitted for the record of the objector or for the record of the board. The board will have the record because you'll get something, but my experience is too many times those comments leave the commenter with no proof of having submitted anything or what was actually submitted.
I think they're going to be fillable PDFs, so the objector should have the ability to save it on their own computer before submitting it.
But that's not a record that it was actually submitted.
Right, and then we will stamp it as received. Is that right, Rebecca?
Yep, you're right. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else as far as confirmation email. I'm not sure, Thomas, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're asking for? Is it just something that says, yes, we received your objection form, or do you want like the form itself returned to you showing that's what we have that you submitted?
The latter is what I'm
Was what
suggesting
you're
would
at,
be,
okay. So
yes.
let,
Is that the commenter gets something back that says, these are the comments that you submitted to us on this date
okay,
for your
let
record.
me, talk with our team on it and, but yeah, it's okay. So it's a good thing to consider. So thank you.
You're welcome. Those were all my comments. I do have a few other more or less editorial proofreading comments that I have printed out and I can leave with Alex and he can get them to you. Not worth
Okay.
taking your time right now.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Brooke,
Yeah, I do want to follow up on Thomas's comments about versions and dates. And I think it is important that every version, even if it's a red line strikeout, be redated or draft 3 or 4 or whatever. Because, I would like to see those ahead of time. I would like them to be posted with the agenda so that I'm looking at the same version you guys are showing us instead of going back to a different version and trying to figure out what page I'm on for the notes that I made. So I think each and every red line strikeout version, whether it's accepted or not, should just be redated so that we know either by version number or date what we're looking at and that we're seeing the most recent version of it.
I mean, we know that you're seeing the most recent version because it's got proposed changes highlighted.
I know, but for me to see that on a screen where I can't look at the whole document with all of the changes on it that you guys have made since the 17th, I think was the last version 2 that we saw, it's hard to respond comprehensively to understand what these changes are. I mean, I can't move the screen to even look back at something we've discussed. So the document that you're going over, we should be able to see and have our own copies of it to prepare so that when we show up, we're not responding spontaneously to red line strikeout language. That's what I'm
So
asking
it
for,
is a
to see
working
that ahead
document.
of time.
It is a working document in our board working files, so you do have access to it.
But the public doesn't, though.
Right.
Which is the other
Right,
issue.
because we're trying to make changes on the fly here in a public venue because we can't do that as a board off, outside of public meeting, outside of open meeting. So
I understand that, but at some point there's a document and it shouldn't be an hour before we're meeting. All I'm asking is when the agenda is posted, any document you want to go over, it's 48 hours ahead. Can we have a copy for Thomas and the other members of the public to look at, as well as ourselves to know? I mean, without me having to, have they been working on it in the past few days? And then I have to go look at that. I'm just trying to be transparent and trying to make sure that our public is looking at the same thing we are and talking about it or giving them that opportunity.
So we could save it 48 hours in advance with the highlighted redlining, but it would be difficult to meet our statutory deadlines to have to pause for 48 hours and not work on the document. Frankly, I think we're already feeling a little time pressure on this one. We're going to be getting applications in just over less than 2 months. And this is just one deliverable that we need to have in place. And I don't think that we can not work on it. We need to get this done. So all I can say is we can save a version 48 hours in advance with a new date and post that, yes, but we have to continue working on it offline.
Well, nobody's saying that you can't, but you know, if it captures 80% of the changes that you've made since last time, that would be useful. That's
Yep,
all I'm
yep,
asking for.
yep.
I'm not asking anybody to stop work or anything like that.
Sarah?
I was just gonna say, I think that's what we're gonna try and do after this meeting. We're gonna have another meeting to try and get it together so we can get another version out for Thursday. I think that part of what put us into this situation is trying to be responsive to the latest round of comments that we received and facilitate those at last minute. So it's walking a balance. And I think we'll try and do that as best we can. But my goodness, it's been a lot longer of a process than what we thought. I think it's more thoughtful process, but it's taken a bit longer. But I think we want to get it right. So it might be a little bit sloppy, but I think it comes from a good place. And I think that's what we're going to try and do for Thursday.
Yeah. Okay. We are a minute over on this topic, so we'll come back to it. And we are now on item G, discussion on Tier 3 rulemaking. Alex, do you want to take it away?
Sure. So let me just bring one item up here. Okay, so as a preface, Tier 3, we are working on rulemaking for that. And in the Tier 3 areas, as you all know, but just for the record, you know, these are areas that the legislature anticipated there would be greater Act 250 jurisdiction. And so we're trying to identify critical natural resource areas that are sensitive and warrant additional Act 250 permitting, perhaps for any project, perhaps for just a smaller jurisdictional trigger. So that all of that sort of remains to be seen. And Act 181 provided the board with essentially the authority and the flexibility to decide most everything about how that will work. You know, what resources should be included, how they would be mapped, whether it would apply to both development and subdivision of the Act 250 rules, or would not include subdivision. So lots for us to talk about. In any case, the working group that we put together has met. Yikes! I forget now. I think it's 4 or 5 meetings, and their last one was last week on July 15th. And at that meeting, the week prior to that meeting, they had been presented with an initial very rough draft of the Tier 3 rules based on their conversations to date, along with a map viewer that's up on our website on the Tier 3 page that showed where the resources that were being proposed for Tier 3 were located for this first draft. So the stakeholder group met. Unfortunately, I did not budget enough time, and so we were not able to go into as much depth and cover all the material. So we will be meeting again on August 8th. At least that's my hope. That's the schedule I've laid out for the stakeholders, and I've heard from several of them that they're available. So I'm hopeful we'll have critical mass. And honestly, originally I wanted to come to the board first, but the stakeholders felt like they wanted to see the draft first and be able to help me tune it up and maybe provide comments before the board saw it, and especially before we went out for broad public engagement. So with that in mind, even though the stakeholders are not yet done reviewing the first draft, I did want to bring it to you so that we could at least start the conversation about Tier 3 and about, you know, bits and pieces of this first draft, with the understanding that it's going to change, and we'll be back in front of you at a later date. So that's all table setting. What I want to accomplish today, so this is on our agenda for today, for Thursday, and potentially for a week from today on the 28th. So we budgeted, you know, discussion at 3 meetings. And Sarah asked me a good question last week when I sent out all the materials to all of you saying, what do you actually want to accomplish on Monday, the 21st? And so my answer was, I want you to review everything because, you know, it's good to have comprehensive, you know, thinking on this, including the map viewer. But I don't think we're going to be able to cover everything in this 1 hour today. So what I want to get through today is to get your comments, to talk about and get your comments on the proposed process and timeline, specifically the extension request that I think we need to make to the legislature as to when these draft rules will be delivered. And I would love to have a formal motion if folks are amenable to have Janet formally make that extension request. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. And then the second thing is I want to do what we did with the stakeholders and start with this protection gap analysis, which actually the NRC recommended that that we do and helped with the first draft. And then I sort of took it from there because that analysis speaks to some of the conversations that the stakeholder group has had about what resources should be covered under Tier 3 and what resources would be better protected and covered under more specific A&R permitting and the like. That's about all I want to get through in our time today. I think, you know, actually going through line by line the draft rules and the like, I see us doing more of that on Thursday. But I'm happy to take this as far as, you know, we're able to today, even if it's further than I anticipated. So with regard to the first item, maybe we'll open it up for questions before I try to talk to you about the time horizon and my suggestion for delaying things a bit. So yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
I was actually just going to make that motion, or Alex.
Okay, well, we could do that, or we could hear from Brooke first, and then you could make the motion. Brooke, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, can we have a discussion first before a motion is made? Simply because I think that there are some conceptual issues that I would like to talk about before we get into everything that you're talking about. Because while I know you don't want to go through the rules, there are some basic premises that I really would like some understanding of, agreement in terms of how this board views Tier 3 enhanced jurisdiction. I am particularly concerned about the laundry list of exemptions. I don't understand why that's part of the conversation yet at all. So I feel like, you know, this is a baked cake, and now I'm here to talk about the icing. And I think that there are essential fundamental understandings of what Tier 3 is supposed to be accomplishing in concert with our current jurisdiction to understand how logistically this would operate to trigger act or Tier 3 jurisdiction, what that means. It seems like there's some abbreviated application process that's being contemplated, perhaps. Like you don't have to show on, you know, if jurisdiction is triggered, it's not really Act 250 jurisdiction, it's just on one thing. So I really think that those are the really important fundamental understandings that need to be agreed upon by this board before the train has left the station and it already has, you know, a version of things. And I went through all of the meeting notes and I see in June where this notion was talked about, but I'm not sure that I saw any stakeholder agreement or anything. And I really don't, that concerns me. I'm not sure that that's how I contemplated Tier 3 jurisdiction to be greater Act 250 jurisdiction.
So Brooke, I am happy to get to all of your concerns, and I think they're valid, and you're not the only one who has them. But we have to start somewhere, and where I wanted to start was less on substance and more on process. And what I'm suggesting is that the process that I had laid out for stakeholder meetings, board review, and then public engagement needs more time, and that in order to have something to bring out to the public that's both understandable and has at least tacit agreement from the board on it conceptually, I think we need to take more time. And we're based on the calendar that we developed, or that I developed, based on the legislative deliverable of February 1st for the draft rules. If we take more time, which is what I'm suggesting, we will not be able to meet that February 1st deadline, period. It can't be done. So all I'm asking for at this conversation right now is, does that make sense to you? Do you have concerns about the process and timing? And if you don't, that's the motion that I think Sarah was proposing to make, the extension request.
Yeah, and I have no issue with changing and pushing off the deadlines, but I don't think that you can do that without understanding what I'm talking about, because I think it affects the process and the timing. Because if you the impression, oh, you already have rules that are at least half baked, I don't agree with what I'm looking at for rules. I don't think that they effectuate the purpose of Tier 3 under Act 181. So that's why it's like, yes, by all means, ask for an extension, but I don't think June is sufficient. That's only 4 months. I mean, ask for 6 months, but have a basis for what time period that we're asking for that delay, to understand how are we reorganizing this, and, you know, work back from the deadline kind of notion, because I want to be sure if we ask for an extension that it is adequate, and then we don't have to go back later. And if, you know, if the legislature's not in session in June anyway, what's a few more summer months to kick off, you know, to make sure that we have like 6 months or whatever. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
Yeah, Brooke, that's a super helpful suggestion. You know, I understand your concerns about the substance of the draft rule, but what you just said is, I think, more relevant to the question I'm putting before you at the front end of today's discussion, which is the extension request. And I value your judgment. And if your concerns are as great as you indicate, maybe you're right. Maybe we should ask for the maximum possible extension, not pushing it from February to June 1st, but pushing it to however far into 2026 we think we can go, and still have a final rule through LCAR and adopted prior to December 31st, when, if that's a hard stop, Tier 3 happens as of December 31st, 2026. So we have to back up from that date and give us time to go through the LCAR process and potentially to respond to concerns they have. So yeah, June, nothing magical about asking the extension to be June. It could be August, but at some point we can't push it any further, because we want to make sure there's time for LCAR to review and us to adjust to any concerns they raise at that time.
Sarah.
I apologize. I just thought my connection was stable and I dropped the call, but I did want to make a motion about an extension. I think with that in mind, I'd like to move that our chair request an extension until September 1st of 2026 for Tier 3, and align with what Alex just said.
Kirsten, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm happy to second that motion. I would echo that I would support asking for as much time as we think may be needed conservatively, even if we have an earlier target completion date that we strive to meet. I would not be too thrilled to go back to the legislature a second time asking for another extension. Because they wouldn't be, you know, in session during the summer months, I think, you know, a later date would be perfectly fine. But Alex, can you foresee any reason why we wouldn't meet a September 1st date?
I'm not sure that we will need a September 1st date, but I like your logic. We should ask for the date that is as late as possible in order to complete by December 31st. And if we get there sooner, good for us. But I think your point and Brooks are both well taken. What I can tell you from the schedule that I developed, we initially anticipated giving the draft rules to LCAR on February 1st per the current deadline. And that resulted in our assumed final adoption by April or May. So think of it as, I'm sort of doing this in my head here, February 1st, March, April, May. So about 3 months from submission to LCAR to actually getting through LCAR and having the rule be completed. And so if we were to put it, if we were to ask for the submission deadline to LCAR to be September 1st, that would allow us October, November, December. That's about the same 3-month period. So I don't think we can go any later than September 1st is what I'm saying. But I think if we ask for September 1st, there's a rational amount of time to be able to have the rule become effective by the true deadline of December 31st.
So Alex, do you know, is there any difference in how quickly LCAR works, given that in the spring, February to April, they're in session and they're not in the fall?
Good point. And yes, I believe it is different, and I'm trusting Rebecca is still with us. I can see your icon. So Rebecca, maybe you can chime in on this. If I remember correctly from our conversations, during the off legislative season, LCAR still meets, but maybe just once a month. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm going to need to think about it because, yes, so I think, well, yes, right, it's a legislative season, but there was something else that was like always like a, to be careful about opening it up during the legislative season because it can open up further than you want. Like it can really like rip open when they're in session versus when they're not. So let me just think about that. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you. I know like because I do think it's, but I don't think there's anything that they meet. I think they meet more often, but I'm not sure if that changes the frequency of how much they do the rules themselves. So I'm sorry I don't have more on that, but I can get more information on how it could be impacted.
If the board wants to take action, or maybe you don't have to pin down, if you want to give Alex some leeway to ask for an extension, you don't necessarily have to put the date by which you want the extension, but then you could confer with Rebecca offline about, different factors and how long it might take to get the legal review and things like that. So you could still hash out some of the details if you want to give them to construct the motion that's a legal, that there's a certain parameter within which you'd be comfortable for having him ask for the extension.
Any objection to that from the people that made the motion and seconded it?
No objection.
I said
I didn't second it, but why can't we just set a date? Do we need more analysis
You
of
could.
how long we need?
It sounded like Rebecca said she would there were some things she could think about. So, I mean, you could set a date, but you could also, if you want
I haven't looked at the timeline that's being presented by Alex. So if you would like me to do that to see how that would pan out, to see, I can do that before putting a specific date on there.
Maybe we could revisit on Thursday.
Yeah, sounds like the right way to go. Why don't we just take this up on Thursday, and that way we can stop talking scheduling and get to some of the substance that I know you all would like to talk about.
Sarah, would you like to withdraw your motion for now?
I will withdraw the motion.
I see Annette put her hand up. Annette, do
Yeah,
you
I
have a
just wanted
comment?
to tell you that I went to the legislature's website for LCAR.
Oh,
They met June 3rd, June 12th, June 20th, July 10th, July 18th, and July 21st. So they do meet regularly in the off session.
okay, thank you.
no.
Okay, well, if we can put that aside for the next meeting, then again, what I'd hoped to talk to you about today was the gap analysis, which is a spreadsheet with some highlighting in it that lists each of the resource areas that the stakeholder group has been talking about for these last couple months. including the 6 that Act 181 requires us to consider. So if you'll entertain me, I'll just walk you down that list.
Can we share that on screen, Alex? Do you want one of
Happy
us to do
to.
so?
No, I can do it.
Okay.
It's a little unwieldy, but I'm
Yeah.
happy to do it. And you tell me if it's not very helpful in terms of the way it's being shared. So hold on just a moment.
Yeah. Can you zoom in just a little?
Yeah, I assumed that would be necessary.
There we go. And then just move the
Is that-
bottom bar. Move the bottom bar
Yeah.
to the right just a little bit.
Is that generally readable for folks? I know
Yeah.
the far right might be cut off just a titch. Okay, well, moving right along. So we're starting with the six resource areas that are outlined in Act 181 that we're required to look at. And the first one being river corridors. Hopefully you had a chance, I'm pretty sure you all did quite some time ago, to look at ANR's preliminary analysis that they did back in April, in which they looked at each of these 6 resource areas and provided their own understanding of both what they were, where they were, and to what extent the resource was already covered under existing ANR permitting. So river corridors was one of those areas that ANR discussed, and some of what you see in this spreadsheet is really just a encapsulation of what they had indicated, with some modifications based on the stakeholder discussion. In any case, just to jump to the conclusion, largely the conversation at the stakeholder groups was that river corridors would be better protected via the planned ANR statewide permit program, which is supposed to come online in a couple of years. However, there was a recognition that there's a gap in that planned permit program for river corridors, because that program right now is only intended to cover mapped river corridors, which is about 5,600 miles of stream and river, and that there are another 14,000 miles of small perennial streams and small intermittent streams that would potentially not be covered by that new ANR statewide permit program. So there's an understanding that there is a gap in the protection for river corridors. But what I'm saying in this spreadsheet, based on, again, on what the stakeholder conversation was, that rather than sweep those small streams in to the Tier 3 and to the Act 250 program, that it would be better for us to recommend that this upcoming statewide permitting program for river corridors be expanded to include them to the extent that that protection is necessary. That is going to be a targeted program specific to river corridors that is new and could have the ability to morph in order to cover more of the resource that the group felt was significant. So that's why the rationale was to not include river corridors in Tier 3, but why the report that would come with the Tier 3 draft rules would recommend that additional protections be provided through this river corridor permitting program that's in the works. Why don't I just walk down through the 6 enumerated resources on this first page, and then maybe questions, conversations. Unless, Brooke, go ahead. If you want to jump in now on river corridors, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it might be easier to do them one at a time, if you don't mind. I'm just curious in terms, for like ANR's permitting of this, is how does that work? Is that also, can't be through the municipalities. It's a state permit that you're going to have to get if you're in a river corridor?
That's correct.
Okay. And is that something that is more than just like a public comment kind of thing. Because often what we hear about A&R permitting is it's not a very robust, there's a gamut, right? There's, one piece of paper with some check marks on it, on some boxes, all the way to very sophisticated findings and conclusions. So just trying to understand the quality of the permitting that is underway. And is it statutory or is this discretionary by A&R?
So it's a statutory requirement, but just like we are establishing rules for tier 3, A&R will have to establish rules for this river corridor permitting program. That's why it's a couple of years out. They'll need time to do that. So exactly how the permit process will work is yet to be determined. That'll be decided by the rules that they develop and promulgate. But I'm not sure who else is on this call from A&R, so apologies if I'm speaking for somebody, but I will note that during our stakeholder meetings, A&R did note the fact that they feel that their permits actually sometimes allow for more public comment than ours, given the fact that so few of the A&R permit applications go to a hearing, that so many of them are dealt with as minors. Their comment was, in some cases, the A&R permits, whether it's for wastewater permits or stormwater, actually enable more public comment. I don't really want to pass judgment on that or make this a competition between A&R and the Act 250 program, but I just want to acknowledge that comment was made, and yeah, it's hard to answer your question, Brooke, because it's a river corridor permit program that has not yet been developed.
Alex, I just admitted Billy Coster, who may be able to confirm what you just said.
Yeah, it was largely something that Billy mentioned at one of our meetings. I don't know that we need to go further with it unless Billy wants to, but
no, I'm fine. I think you explained it very well. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Unless Billy
So
wants to
if there aren't further questions on river corridors, not that we can't go back to it, but I'll just move on to headwater streams. So headwater streams, as you may remember from the initial A&R mapping, actually cover close to 70 to 90% of the state. So I know when I first went into this conversation, I thought, oh, headwater streams, I'm really concerned about those. And I do want tier 3 to cover them if there's a way to do it. And I just naively assumed that they accounted for a small percentage of the land area, and I was wrong. So the general definition of a headwater stream is a stream that is at its source, meaning that either no other streams flow into it, what we call a first order stream, it's the beginning, or one other stream flows into it. It's a second order stream, so it's very close to the beginning. There isn't a firm definition in Act 181 or in statute, but that's generally the definition, a working definition that at least that I found in researching the topic. In any case, it is those first and second order streams that cover such a large percentage of Vermont. We have a lot of streams, and that's why. And so the group talked about how do we narrow the field? How do we identify just those headwater stream areas that are perhaps the most sensitive? And one of the discussions that came up during the stakeholder meetings was that we're also concerned about steep slope areas. We're also concerned about areas where there's poor stormwater infiltration, soils that effectively allow stormwater to run off of them rapidly and cause downstream flooding. And so there was a comment made, is there a way that we can intersect these various related resource areas in order to end up identifying just the most sensitive portions of the headwater stream catchment areas or sub watersheds? And so headwater streams is highlighted in yellow because I felt that we did want to include it in tier 3. But the way it's included is important. And when we get to the mapping, you're going to see some of the limitations of the data on this front, which means we may have more work to do. But in general, headwater streams are proposed in this first draft to be part of tier 3, but just the most sensitive portions of them. And I guess I should clarify, when the term is headwater streams, what really we're talking about are headwater stream drainage or catchment areas, not just blue lines on the map, but the areas that drain into those blue lines on the map. So moving right along, the next item that was enumerated in Act 181 was habitat connectors of statewide significance. This is another one that that I believe the group felt, and I also felt it made sense to include in the Tier 3 designation area. And as ANR's mapping showed early on, if we just look at the Vermont Conservation Design protocols program, and we just look at their priority and their highest priority connectivity blocks across the state, it maps over 60% of Vermont. So similar to the headwater stream catchment areas, there was the feeling that habitat connectors of statewide significance has to be a subset of these Vermont Conservation Design connectivity blocks. It's a recognition that that is the place to start. That is where the best data and scientific consensus is about important habitat connectors. It is the Vermont Conservation Design data set, but that we need to figure out where the most sensitive areas are within it. So in order to get there, Bob Zano and I from the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department worked on a GIS analysis to try to identify potential connector areas between the highest priority connectivity blocks from the Vermont Conservation Design system, and particularly focus those on areas near roads. Why? Because of the road rule. The ANR's suggestion was the road rule is likely going to establish Act 250 jurisdiction for impacts to interior forests, where new development is proposing roads in excess of 800 feet of length. So that perhaps for Tier 3, we can instead focus our efforts on those areas that are not going to be jurisdictional under the road rule, meaning areas within 800 feet or so of roads. And so Bob and I focused on an analysis that looked at where are the highest priority connectivity blocks in relationship to roads. And we folded in one other data layer, which is a fish and wildlife data layer, assessing road segments by the amount of, by the priority of a potential wildlife crossing in terms of how much vegetation is on either side of the road. So low priority road segments would be those that are, a house on one side and then cornfield on the other side. A high priority road segment would be one that had intact forest on both sides of the road. So the GIS analysis was to try to combine all of those data sets to come up with habitat connectors that were important to keep these highest priority connectivity blocks to allow movement between them. There are all sorts of issues with the analysis we did on that front. And that's why I'm thinking we'll talk more about that on Thursday so we can look at maps and go into some of the ways that analysis worked and some of the ways it did not. But that's where we started. And that's what the draft rules, this first rough draft, are looking at. The next two areas that are that we're required to look at were riparian areas. These are areas along streams and shorelines, and Class A waters. And for both of these, the suggestion was made that there are better, more specific permitting programs to protect those resources rather than having them be Tier 3 for Act 250. Specifically, riparian areas, if they warrant additional protection, that it would make better sense to have a specific riparian protection permitting program. And that's possibly something that could be suggested as an add-on to the river corridor permitting program that ANR is charged with developing over the next couple of years. As far as Class A waters, it's a little murkier in my mind, although I've had it explained to me a number of times by our friends at ANR. These Class A waters are sort of our most pristine waters of the highest water quality, and also those that serve for public surface water, public water supplies. ANR has rules that help help with increased standards when ANR permits are requested in Class A water drainage areas. And they also have an anti-degradation rule that is in its interim phase and has been for a good long time, that they are seeking to finalize, that would provide additional protections for Class A waters and hopefully allow for more Class A waters to be delineated. Again, with this resource area, it felt like ANR has the tools to provide the necessary protection. It's a matter of finalizing those interim rules and making some statutory changes that are stumbling blocks for allowing that to happen. Finally, natural communities was the sixth enumerated resource that we were required to consider. And the Tier 3 draft rules do include a subset of those. First of all, natural communities in and of themselves is not really a resource area. It's a way of ecologically describing the types of ecological communities across the state. What we've been mapping for years now are what are called significant natural communities. Fish and Wildlife has mapped these areas, and these are natural community types that are of particular significance because they are rare or very representative of an important natural community type. And we only have partial mapping across the state of the most significant natural communities, but we do have that mapping. And so the stakeholder group felt that it made sense to recognize the mapping we have and include those most rare types in Tier 3 so as to provide them with better protection. There are some significant pros and cons to including these. It's easy to map natural communities on public land. We own it. It's much harder to do so on private land. And in the past, Fish and Wildlife has done that mapping with the consent of landowners and with the understanding that that mapping would not be used in a regulatory capacity. Well, now here we are potentially using it in a regulatory capacity. So there is some concern, and the stakeholder group expressed that, about this creating a chilling effect on the ability to do any further mapping of significant natural communities on private lands. But at the same time, there's a recognition that the most rare types are ones that we probably have a good sense of the universe of, and it may make sense to go ahead and try to protect them. And that's why the Tier 3 first draft includes them. Go ahead, Brooke.
Going back to the degradation rulemaking by ANR, when is that expected to be completed? Because it looks like it started in 2021. And while I understand there's a current interim grouping or rule, when is this expected to be completed?
That's a super good question. And I believe it's been longer than that, actually. I believe the interim rule has been in effect, I want to say for 10 years, but Billy, if you're on this call and you want to chime in, please do. My understanding is that there have been multiple attempts to finalize the rule, and that ANR has pulled back each time because of concerns expressed about that final rule. And as it was explained to me, there are some statutory provisions that that make the potential to delineate additional Class A waters highly unlikely, and that those statutory provisions really need to be addressed in order for Class A waters additional Class A waters to sort of come online. And all of that is somehow tied up in the inability to find closure on the final anti-degradation rule. Sorry, Brooke, that's a very high-end explanation. Like I said, if Billy's here, perhaps he can say a little bit more. Otherwise, I'm happy to get you a little more dirt on that for next time.
I'd actually be more interested in an understanding and comparison of what anti-degradation means versus protection, or you know what I mean? It's like I'm not Thomas Weiss, I believe, raised the issue in his correspondence to the board about anti-degradation is not further polluting it or something of that nature. So just understanding what the standard is and what it
Yep.
means for protection would be really helpful.
Yeah, let me try to put that together from the materials that A&R has provided to me in a manner that's hopefully not just giving you the same materials, but some sort of substantive summary for next time, so that you can see that. It's not straightforward. I'll be honest with you. At least my reading of it is that it's not straightforward. But yeah, I'm happy to try to do that.
Awesome, thanks.
So those are the 6 enumerated resources under Act 181. 3 of them were selected to be part of Tier 3 in this first draft. I'm going to flip the page on this document and very quickly just show you the other resources that the stakeholder group discussed. So again, highlighted at the top are 2 that were included in the draft rule in combination with the headwater stream area analysis. Those were steep slopes and high elevation areas, particularly high elevation, meaning those areas below 2,500 feet, but above, in this case, 1,200 feet was the number selected for that headwater streams intersection analysis. Understanding that most development is jurisdictional above 2,500 feet. So there was some thinking that Tier 3 doesn't need to go above 2,500 feet. We can talk more about that. I know Kirsten has some good experience on that, and Stephanie Giles had provided me with some examples of existing subdivisions that were pre-Act 250 above 2,500 feet that we might want to touch with Tier 3. But in any case, those 2 are sort of woven into the headwater streams analysis. The rest of them that you see on this page are not included in this first draft of Tier 3. So we discussed rare, threatened, and endangered species locations, as well as their habitats. We discussed interior forest blocks. We discussed urban forests. This was a suggestion from the stakeholder group that there might be forests within Tier 1 areas that might benefit from a Tier 3 designation. Farmland and agricultural soils were discussed. Flood hazard areas were discussed, as were source water protection areas and hydric soils, as well as sand and gravel deposits and undeveloped shoreline. Each of them had various levels of mapping today, and each of them had some rationale for why they don't make great sense to include as a Tier 3 resource. Not all of these are based on a consensus of the stakeholder group. So I just want to be clear with you that we had lots of stakeholder discussions. There was some agreement in some regards, but not on everything. And so this first draft is my best attempt to try to synthesize the input given, but I don't want you to think that this is a fait accompli and that the stakeholders as a group are in agreement with this. And that's part of why I said we need more time, because the reaction from the stakeholders last week on the 15th was lots of questions and a fair number of concerns about this first draft. So I think there's more work to be done. But I'm happy to take your questions about this laundry list of resource areas if there's a particular one that you're scratching your head about why it was not included in the first draft. Go ahead, Brooke.
Sorry to be your only taker.
Yeah, it's okay.
Flood hazard area. Explain to me why, if there is a town that doesn't have zoning and hasn't adopted, floodplain regulation, what happens? The state has a permitting program for that, and build cannot happen without a permit from them. That seems to be
That's a super good question. No, this is a good question, and I'm not sure that this spreadsheet does an adequate job of explaining it. Possibly because it might want to be a tier 3 resource. Honestly, after the first few meetings of the stakeholder group, they asked me, like, what are you thinking? Like, where we don't really know where you're going to go with all of our feedback. And I told them which resource areas I felt like made sense. And flood hazard areas were one of the ones I thought probably did make sense. So I'm a little bit schizophrenic on it. That's not the right word. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword right now. But what I can tell you is that the standards for review of development in a flood hazard area are highly technical. I don't know, Brooke, if you've had any clients that have been through that process, and if you're familiar with it, but typically flood hazard regulations and the development within those areas is done at a municipal level, and the required minimum regulatory standards are defined by the National Flood Insurance Program at the federal level. And then the state comes in and sort of helps municipalities make sure their regulations meet those minimum standards to be eligible for the National Flood Insurance Program. And in a couple of years, we'll also be making sure that those municipal regulations meet a state standard that the ANR is going to outline. So all of the standards are sort of ratcheting up. But I guess what I want to say is that the regulations themselves are very technical. And it feels like the best place to manage development in those areas through a technical permitting program is not Act 250, but instead a tailor-made permit program for flood hazard areas. And I think what several of the stakeholders were saying at our last couple meetings is that if we're concerned about areas of the state where a municipality has not adopted flood hazard regulations, and therefore the level of review for development in that resource area is not there, that perhaps it's time for the state of Vermont to have a statewide flood hazard permitting program that's managed at the state level, not at the municipal level. And again, I don't want to speak for people, but I do want to call out that, you know, our Vermont League of Cities and Towns representative acknowledged as much at our last stakeholder meeting, saying it's really hard for municipalities to try to make sure they have the most up-to-date flood hazard regulations when the federal government has one set of standards, the state is trying to define another set of standards. And so that's a long-winded way of saying, I think that this draft contemplates a recommendation that the state consider a statewide flood hazard regulation permit program outside of municipalities, in place of municipalities' programs, and outside of the Act 250 review process. Not unlike what we do for wetlands today, where the state has a statewide permitting program for any development proposed within a wetland.
Yeah, my concern is these are all, I mean, are these going to happen? Do we know? And yeah, I have had experience through municipal zoning trying to get a fill permit to bring mobile homes out of the floodplain, and had a heck of a time with the particular municipality where it was, we had to go on appeal to the environmental division to get our fill permit. It was only an extension to a fill permit. So I do have some experience with it that leads me to be very concerned about either municipal regulation on this being consistent, and we're also dealing with interim housing exemptions in Act 250 that basically define priority housing projects as not having any obstacle to being sited in a floodplain or a river corridor. That gives me pause for great concern. Whereas all of the other housing projects can't be in floodplains, and that's in the exemption section of 6001, whatever the subsections are. So floodplains, I think, are a really big deal, and if there's a way to make that consistent throughout the state, this is one way of doing it, making it a a resource that's protected. But if A&R has plans and will be doing this, I would like to see it one way or the other, because, for example, I don't think it's compliant with our environmental justice obligations to have these, these interim housing guidelines that say, you can build these projects, only not in the floodplain or the floodway, unless it's a priority housing for affordable housing, and that's who we're going to put into the floodplain. I find that remarkable. I don't think that's what was intended by Act 181, but right now that seems to be the plain language of the statute. So to me, finding a protection to make sure that affordable housing doesn't get put in floodplains is really important. Or
I hear
other
you.
non-infill new structures, all that kind of things that wouldn't be covered by waivers. So
Yep,
that's
I
my
hear you,
thoughts
Brooke.
on it.
I appreciate that, and I don't disagree with the idea, and that's why when I started this, I kind of thought flood hazard areas might want to be tier 3. Just know that there was a very strong sentiment in the stakeholder group that having duplicative permit programs is not where we want to go, and that if the best way to protect a resource is its own unique permitting program, we ought to recommend that. If the best way to protect that resource is the Act 250 review program, then we ought to suggest that too, and that's what tier 3 is all about. But I think there's a recognition that not every important resource, it will be best managed and protected through the Act 250 program. And so we have to evaluate each one, given the nature of the resource and the nature of existing or planned permitting regarding it. But your point about, like, is it happening? Like, when would we see a statewide flood hazard, permit program run by the state? It's a good point. There's nothing in statute to compel that to come into existence. And if we were to recommend it, we would have no certainty that it ever would. So yeah, we have to make that determination about whether it's ripe for tier 3 or deserves something else at a later date. Go ahead, Janet.
I'll echo that flood hazard regulations are very technical. For instance, if you are, raising a home, you're placing fill in the flood hazard, which displaces the floodwaters and potentially, causes problems for somebody else. So that's why placing fill in the flood hazard is a difficult process. And you have to have, engineers that can, and maybe Kirsten can speak to this, that can estimate the kinds of displacement that any proposed development would cause, and whether the overall flood elevation changes. And so in any case, nothing can be built in the floodway. We're talking about flood hazard areas, but all flood hazard regulations prohibit construction in the floodway. So, the question really is, when should we be allowing any kind of development in the flood hazard outside of the floodway? And in areas that are already highly developed, the interim regulations do allow for infill in those areas, but those developments still must meet floodproofing standards. So if, for instance, a building was built there, the first floor would have to be floodproof or raised above the flood elevation. And you can't build enclosed space under the flood elevation or the base flood elevation. But I think what you're saying, Alex, is that what is contemplated for flood hazard areas is, instead of including them in tier 3, to recommend that the legislature require a state permit for flood hazard areas. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, essentially, I think some folks will wanted it recognized that because Act 121 compels the Agency of Natural Resources to set a new minimum standard for municipal regulations, that we ought to let that play out and see how that goes. But I still have some of the same concerns Brooke does, in that if a municipality does not participate in the National Flood Insurance
Right.
Program and does not have flood hazard regulations,
Right,
then there is no flood hazard review in that
Right.
municipality, even within the floodway.
right.
So,
So what I was
there's
wondering,
definitely a gap.
right, so I was wondering, we know which municipalities those are. Why not include
Right.
them in the tier 3 until and if the Agency of Natural Resources develops a statewide permit for flood hazard areas?
Yeah, that's a very logical way to move forward that I think might better address Brooke's concern and mine as well. Yep.
The
I'm
other
going to lower
thing,
my hand because that was my question as
Okay.
well.
the other thing about flood hazard regulations is there's a lot of variability across the state, and it can be very confusing. And even the state's recommended standards change constantly. So some municipality could adopt the recommended standards in 2021, but they are completely different than they are now, because those recommended standards that the state puts out change constantly. So I think, from my point of view, it would be great if there were a statewide flood hazard permit and not, not these myriad different municipal permits across the state, I think. And for any municipality that doesn't want to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, that maybe could be tier 3.
Okay. Sarah?
I'm going to take a little bit of a different tact on this. And we could spend a lot more time just on the flood hazard portion of this, but I'm going to disagree and say that I think Act 250 is not a fine enough honed tool to be effectual with communities that do not have flood regulations. I first want to acknowledge that right now I think we've tried to bring along a lot of towns. There are financial funding benefits to having base flood regulations, as with ERAF. In case of emergency or disaster, you as a community can get reimbursed more highly by the state and possibly the feds by having flood regulations that meet basic standards. And I would think that most of the communities that can have availed themselves of that or tried to avail themselves of that. But floodplain standards are very technical, and to have Act 250 try and take them on as a baseline, I think is the incorrect place. I think that is with ANR. And I think ANR is working on that process. And so I'd rather wait and see that play out. I think it could be a recommendation of the board back to the legislature in terms of areas that perhaps didn't fit within tier 3, but are also equally deserving of additional protection. But even just some of the things that were stated about different types of flood proofing, we as a very well-educated board, some of those things were somewhat inaccurate. And so I just want to be cognizant of the fact that with where we're going as a state with this important need, I think there should be a separate focus on it. I think it is deserving of additional protections requirements, but not necessarily with an Act 250. Thanks.
So we are at time and we have this on our next two agendas. Is it, Alex, do you feel like you've got good feedback and feel like we got somewhere with this today that we can move on?
Yeah. And I think it would be good to have any public comment here.
Alex, something has happened to your sound. Your audio is very chopped up and we can't really understand you. I don't know. I don't know if turning off your video would help or not, because it's not helping Sarah, but shoot. Yeah, is anyone hearing Alex?
It's garbled
mean,
on my end. I'm gonna turn
yeah.
off my video. That may help him.
I'll turn mine off too. We'll try.
I tried closing out any other apps that you have running, Alex, if possible. That was one of the other pieces of advice I got.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna help them, the rest of us having the video off, but.
Alex, try talking again.
Okay.
No. Yeah, still bad. Can you hear us just fine? Okay. Well, I heard open and close, but the rest of it was completely garbled. So I
Alex,
think,
if you want to shoot me an email, I'll quickly read it. And like, if there's something you want to say as a closing remark on this topic, I'm happy to read it, and because people can hear
Or you
me, I
could-
think.
yeah.
Would Thomas's
Oh, wait.
computer be able to be used? Like
Well,
if he
he's-
turned his microphone on and Alex turns his off?
Oh, or maybe you can switch to your computer, Alex, instead of the.
They're on the same internet connection, so I don't know
Oh,
that it would help
yeah.
to switch computers. I mean,
Yeah.
couldn't say for sure, but.
Well, I think we can move on because we will be discussing this for the next two meetings. And we have next on the agenda, well, I guess I can ask for comments on the tier three. Oh, now there's an echo.
There you go. That should work.
Alex?
Apologies if you can hear
Oh,
me.
there.
I was trying
Yes.
something, but didn't work.
Well,
so-
now it works. We hear you just fine.
Oh, okay, great. So I was just
I don't know
suggesting
what
that we
just
give,
happened. So, so in any case, is it okay to move on? From your
yeah, I
perspective?
was just suggesting you
Okay.
take any public comments.
Yeah, that's what okay. That's what I was just gonna ask for. Before we go to our next agenda item, are there any public comments on our preliminary tier 3 discussion? Annette?
Yeah, I sent a little background information to Alex and Brooke. They pass it on to you. We did a report on 10 different stories about the Agency of Natural Resources in 2008. And story number 10 recounts the history of anti-degradation. And so our report was 2008, and we still don't have the rule in place. And there was more since then, but it was interesting to see the background on it. I'm a member of the Tier 3 stakeholder group, and I will say that I think that this is an extremely challenging topic. One of the things that you didn't talk about today that you might want to think about is I'm really unclear if something's a Tier 3 area. What does that mean? Is it a jurisdictional trigger? Is it the same jurisdictional trigger as what we have now for Tier 2? Is it a different number of lots? Is it, it's just, how's it going to work? I'm having trouble understanding that. And I think it's I think it's very challenging. I am not sure that we've gotten into that part of the discussion as the stakeholder group. We're talking about what areas should be or shouldn't be involved in it. But once an area is determined to be a tier 3 area, what does that mean? So something for you to think about. Thanks.
Thank you, Annette. Anyone else visiting this meeting that would like to comment on the tier 3 discussion? Okay, thank you. Hearing nothing, seeing no hands. Let's move on to discussion and possible action on appeals and enforcement. And I would like to add that we have a personnel matter to discuss as well. So if there is a motion, can we please add that we would be discussing a personnel matter as well? Brooke?
And just, if I can just add to that for the motion, 1 VSA 313A3 is the provision in the executive session relating to discussions on the employment of public employees.
Okay, so add parentheses 3 to the 1 E through F.
Yes.
Okay.
And that
thanks.
one, I don't know if Brooke, you were going to ask about that, but it doesn't require the finding of premature public knowledge. That one you can just do without that finding.
Okay, great. Then I will move that the board needs to discuss pending and probable Act 250 appeals and enforcement actions, and to have confidential attorney-client communications on these matters. Therefore, I move that we find that premature public knowledge of these matters would place the board at a substantial disadvantage, and that the board enter executive session under 313A2. Is that right, Allison? As well,
A1.
A1, okay. As well as
3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As well as for the purposes of discussing personnel matters under 313A3.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
I,
You need to vote.
I think that was unanimous. Sarah, did we get your vote?
I voted aye.
Okay, yes, it was unanimous. So we will enter executive session. We will report back out before adjourning. Thank you.
And I'm going to leave the meeting, so,
well, that's nice of you, and I don't have to move. Thanks, Thomas.
right. I usually don't stay for these because a lot of times you don't always
We don't always
take
take
any
any
action
action. Right,
afterwards. And if
right.
you do, I have no idea what the action is anyway, and I haven't been checking out the court cases. So,
All right.
it'll get me out of here half an hour earlier than you get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And Alex,
Okay, looks like we are still recording. And we
Correct.
have 5 board members, so Brooke, I believe you have a motion.
I do. I move to authorize enforcement to transmit a notice of alleged violation with directive to apply for the required land use permit amendment for ongoing pit operations and or extension or an extension for reclamation in case number 2024_082.
All right. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Kirsten. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Look to be unanimous. Looked and heard unanimous to me. Next, Brooke.
I also moved to authorize enforcement to send a notice of alleged violation to the respondents in enforcement case 2025_069.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kirsten.
I'm
Discussion?
sorry, if I could add to it, to require the respondents to get a permit.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second the revised motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That is 5. That is unanimous. And Kirsten, I believe you have
Aye.
a motion.
Yep, I move to authorize enforcement to issue a proposed civil citation with a $1,500 penalty, $11,125 waiver penalty option in enforcement case 2025_041.
Okay, thanks.
I'll second.
Thank you, Brooke. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That is also unanimous. Thank you. And that is all we have on the agenda for today.
I'll move to adjourn.
Thank you, Brooke.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kirsten. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That's 5 again. All right, we'll see you soon. Thank you for participating.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Aye.